Hi, I'm Luis, and I am totally blind.
And I'm Diana, and I'm partially sighted. And today we're actually going to be talking about blind people or blind characters in the movies. We have two movies that we watched. One of them is Daredevil, and the other one is Scent of a Woman. But before we talk about those movies, I actually have some questions for Luis. He says that he's totally blind, but I want to know, really, is he? Or is he just pretending? Well, so we have a few questions. I guess I will answer them too because I mean sometimes when you're growing up, people are like, "She's really not
hmm
blind" or whatever, you know. So I have a few questions for you, Luis. Are you ready?
yes, I'm ready.
All right. So question number one: Can you read Braille? I cannot. Can you?
No, I can't read Braille either.
All right. So I guess that kind of like moves us down the totem pole when it comes to being blind. Do you have a talking watch?
Um, well, yes, I guess, yeah, I do. What about you?
I don't have a talking watch right now that works. I've had talking watches before. I have like clocks, like an old one that I ask time
Right,
sometimes, and sometimes I ask my device.
right,
So I guess a lot of people have those, even if they're not blind or visually impaired.
right. And
Okay.
also nowadays, like your phone can like talk and tell you the time too. So it's kind of like not necessarily a talking watch, but it could be like the phone itself. You know?
Okay. Yeah, that's true. Very true. So, do you have a guide dog by chance?
No guide dog, but yes, pets. Dog as a pet, yes, but not a guide dog. What about you?
I do not have a guide dog or a pet, so no. All right. Let's see. Do you know how to use let's see. All right. It's echolocation. Do you know how to use it or how it works?
I know how it
If I
works. I know how it works, but I don't know how to use it. What about? Do you know how it works or how to use it?
I've seen people click and do that kind of thing,
Yeah.
it doesn't really work for me. I mean, I've never really tried. I guess I
Right.
didn't really need it because I'm not totally blind.
Right.
But no, I have not tried using echolocation. So, what about do you listen to audiobooks?
Yes, I do. At times I do. So yes. Do you listen to audiobooks?
Yeah, I've been listening to audiobooks for a long time since I was a student and I was a kid. Those have always been something that I have used and still do because I love reading.
Right.
Okay. But here's another one that kind of goes with that. It says, "Do you read material in large print?"
Well, not anymore since
Do
I'm
you?
blind. No, not anymore since I'm blind. Do you?
I do. I'm not totally blind, so I still can. I use a magnifying glass, and that's actually the next question. Do you use a magnifier or device to help you see? And for reading, I do use a magnifying glass, and so like a font 12 can become bigger. So like I don't really use large print, but the magnifier helps me
Right.
in that way, you know.
Yeah. No.
When
Well.
you could see,
Yeah. When I
did
could
you
see,
use?
I would use those things, but not. Well, obviously not since I'm blind. Not anymore.
Okay. So you're totally blind. Do you use a cane?
Yes. Yes, I use a cane.
Okay, and you know how, right? You know properly and all that.
For the most part. What about you? Have you
Okay.
ever used a cane?
I've gotten trained on how to use a cane properly. I had mobility training in school, but I actually don't use a cane.
Mm-hmm.
It's here if I ever should need it or, that sort of thing, but I don't use one.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here's the next one. Do you wear sunglasses in buildings or your house 24/7, like all the time? Do you do
Um,
that?
no, not all the time. I mean, I have sunglasses that I use when I'm outside, but not 24/7, and they're more for like well, I'm self-conscious about people looking at my eyes, and also just kind of for people to know that, I mean, I am blind, because sometimes people don't realize it. So the cane itself and even the sunglasses are like an indicator to people. What about yourself? I
Right.
imagine that you don't.
And
Mm-hmm.
well, I use sunglasses like most people do, but I think for me, I use it when I wear like contacts, and usually because it's so sunny, sometimes I'm sensitive to light, so I think a lot of visually impaired people have that problem.
Yeah.
And so I use sunglasses like even when I go inside and it's bright somewhere,
Right.
inside like a building, but not very often. And it's not 24/7 like you might see people in like movies and that sort of thing, you know?
Right.
So so yeah, you got to know a little bit about us. But you kind of are hearing maybe that what you see in the movies isn't necessarily the case. So, Luis, I have a question for you.
I have a question for you
How
too.
many? Okay, what's your question?
My question is, can you describe what you see? Like, how far away can you see, or how is it that I don't know, like, yeah, just what do you see, or how do you see compared to, I guess, what normal people might think? Like, how close do you need to get to something to see it? Can you see people's faces? You know, like, describe your eyesight. Like,
Okay. Well, I cannot see details in people's faces. Can't see like eye color or like if people have pimples or whatever, details in faces, like that sort of thing, I cannot see. Probably if I needed to, I would be looking at a picture of someone and then I'd be able to see it better because I'd have a
mm-hmm,
magnifying glass. As for how far away I can see, I can describe like when I used to read, like on my computer and write, I used to have to blow up my font to a 72
right,
instead of a 12, which is a regular font. And to see like from far away, like I can kind of see like what's in front of me, but not necessarily like details.
mm-hmm.
So I can know that it's a person, but if they're like too far away, like I don't know, like I'm not very good with feet and inches and that kind of thing.
Okay,
But I just know like if someone's across the room, I probably wouldn't be able to tell you who it was unless I heard them speaking. And I don't know, I guess I see 20 um it's something like 2200 or something like that. So I guess like what a person sees 200 feet away, I can only see like from like 20 feet or something like that. I'm not very
yeah,
good at explaining how much I can see. It's really hard.
yeah,
But most people think I can see a lot better than I can.
right,
So that's
right, right.
how it is.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
Okay, so now we have this question right here, which I think is kind of interesting to know as a visually impaired person. How many visually impaired people do you actually know in real life? And what was your impression of them when you met them? And this
Um,
is from the perspective of a visually impaired person.
okay, I would say maybe like five people. I guess that I've known of them and met them. I guess even yeah, like five people, and it's encouraging because they were all like professionals. Well, three of them were students, and two of them were actually like counselors themselves, but they were blind. So that was very encouraging to see that even though they had you know, the limited eyesight or no eyesight, they were still like functioning or studying, you know, to become you know, professionals. So that was very encouraging just to know that, you know, that despite the, you know, the obstacle, you know, they're still going forward. So it was very encouraging. What about yourself? Do you know any blind people? And the same question to you.
Um, well, I went to school with different students that were blind, but I didn't know them at the time. Like, I know that for years I had a VI instructor that would come in and he would talk about this one girl,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, "Who is this girl?" You know, and I never like throughout all the years that I went to school, I just didn't know her. And then we ended up going to the same community college for some years. So then I actually got to
Mm-hmm.
know her when I was in college,
Mm-hmm.
in community college. And then when I went to university, I think I met another student there that was visually impaired, and both of them functioned pretty well because they were partially sighted. But I think their vision was better than mine.
Mm-hmm.
And so I met two people there. And then sometimes when I was younger, I used to go to the summer camps. So I would meet like the different students that went to the camps. And so that's kind of how I got to know like how other people with visual impairment like did things or what they did or what they used. And that's when I learned about audio descriptive movies. And I also remember there was a teacher that was an English teacher when I was in middle school, and he was totally blind. Um, and so to me that was interesting, but
Mm-hmm.
they never put me in his class because they thought that if
Wow.
I ended up in his class, he would treat me like he'd expect a lot more from me
Oh, wow.
because of him, like being there, but he also had like a teacher's aide, and
Oh, okay.
actually she was one of my friend's moms was his teacher's aide. But I was kind of glad to know that he was there, and that was interesting to me, but I didn't really want him as a teacher necessarily because I was kind of afraid, you
Oh,
know.
okay. That you would just
But
expect more, like you were saying.
yeah, but basically those were the kind of people that I came in contact. But
Right.
I didn't really know that many people, and I just thought it was interesting to know that there were other people
Hmm.
like me, and I thought, the people that I met were like, pretty cool and stuff. So
Right.
that was my perspective of it.
Yeah. No, that actually helps a lot because sometimes we feel like we're the only ones, but there are other people that are like can relate to us, in that sense, and that really does help a lot.
Yeah. So like, and the same thing with watching some of these movies, it can be exciting. Like even to see shows that feature visually impaired people, it's interesting. But then other times when we see it, I think sometimes we're a little bit disappointed. So we'll be talking about the two movies that we watched, but before we do that, I just wanted to ask you one more question, and it's what sorts of things don't you expect a blind person to be able to do?
Um.
So yeah,
Yeah. Well, like I guess like the obvious questions would be like, well,
obvious answer.
the obvious answers would be like driving a car, uh,
Mm-hmm.
shooting a gun, flying an
Yep.
airplane, things like those.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. Also, I think it'd be hard to like do like a lot of like action stuff. Like I wouldn't imagine someone with a visual impairment to be like an action like how they have those people that do the action
The
parts in the
stunt
movies.
doubles.
Like so I wouldn't want them to do that, or to even be like on like how they used to have circuses and
Right.
the trapeze and do like all these stunts, I guess
Yeah.
you could say. I wouldn't want a blind person to be out there doing stunts because
Right.
but I did see someone on AGT
Oh
who
wow.
like he had his eyes closed or there was something wrong with his eyes and he was doing stunts. So
Well, that's interesting.
I mean, yeah, I guess he wasn't afraid, but that would be it's just scary for me to see anyone do stunts, but especially like a visually impaired person, you
Right.
know.
Right. Right.
Okay, so let's move on to the first movie that we watched. And this is Daredevil, which has Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner, and it came out in 2003. So, what can you tell us about this movie?
Well, this movie was about. It's pretty much like a superhero, and well, I think he's kind of commonly known, but for people that might not know of his like origin story, because this was like a movie that kind of touched on his origin, and then I know a lot of people didn't like it at the time, but it's pretty much he's like a young boy who he has an accident, and then like radioactive waste goes into his eyes, and ever since
Mm-hmm.
that happens, he becomes blind, but he develops like superhuman abilities, like he has like radar senses, he has like super hearing, supersonic
Mm-hmm.
hearing. He's like, I mean, it's not a like due to the accident, but he's also like he kind of develops his body, so he becomes very agile, very strong, and so that's pretty much the character itself and the movie itself. I mean, I enjoyed it. I remember watching it when I was in high school, and it was one of the movies that I did really like watching at the time. What are your impressions of the movie?
Well, first, what do you rate it? Like,
Uh,
what's the rating on it?
well, for me, 4 stars, and I know it might be lower for some people, but for me, 4 stars because it's enjoyable, and I did own it, so I actually did own it, and I would watch it. I watched it a couple times when I was in high school. What about you? What would
Okay.
you rate it?
I would rate it 3.5 stars. Because there were some things that just were a little bit silly, I guess you
Mm-hmm.
could say. And like for instance, I'm just like, why did they have to make him blind again? Like, I know it's like a superhero kind of thing, and they wanted to make it unique or whatever, but it's just there were a lot of times when it was like, oh, he's blind, so he needs his sunglasses and he needs his cane. But wait, he's gonna fight now, so he's just gonna throw his cane away and do a bunch of flips and all these kinds of things that, like, if you were blind, there's no way that you would just be flipping around and
Right.
and doing all those moves that he did. But
Right.
so like it was silly. And then some parts, well, they wanted him and Jennifer Garner. to fight, to have scenes together fighting. So they like had to make up a way for them to do that, and it just seemed like kind of forced, you
Right.
know?
Yeah. No, like usually when it comes to like a disability in a movie, it's either like it's made seem like very like the person is made seem very weak, or they kind of like accentuate the disability to give it like make it like something that's a strength, right? Like, and this movie for sure did the opposite. It kind of like made him seem like a superhero. Well, obviously he was a superhero, but like making it seem like larger than life. You know what I mean? Because even in the movie Ray, which we had talked about last time, there was a scene in
Hmm.
that movie where, like, as a little boy, Ray, he's kind of like in the room, and there's a cricket that the mom is looking for, and then it's like Ray is the one that actually like finds it. So sometimes they kind of give him a little more like they exaggerate some of their senses, the other senses. So I don't know.
Well, I get it because I think a lot of people that have visual impairments, do their senses are
Heightened.
better
Hmm.
heightened, you know? Like for instance, I remember a time when I was in a group of people and it was like a lot of people because we were lining up for a parade,
Right.
because I was in band, and I just remember like standing around waiting for us to like go, and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, that smell is horrible. It
Uh,
smells bad." And I smelled manure,
oh,
and everyone else like looking at me like, What the heck?" And then like 3 minutes later, everyone else started complaining about
uh-huh.
it. And I was just like, yeah, that was so 3 minutes ago, I smelled it a lot longer and ago, and it's strong to me. So
Right.
I think sometimes our senses are heightened, and so
Mm-hmm.
they try to do that in the movies with that,
Mm-hmm.
but then like you said, they
Yeah,
they overdo it.
they exaggerate it. Like they'll have a scene just to like, I mean, it's true that the other senses compensate, but I guess that's a scene that kind of like they use to, I guess, to show it without like explaining it. I guess that's like the scene
Mhm.
that like they say like actions speak louder than words kind of thing. So maybe that's how they like, okay, so let's see, he has really good hearing now, or something like that.
Mhm.
But yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like, but this movie for sure, like blindness was depicted like not at all. Like it was not accurately depicted at all. And I mean, because
No.
it's a comic, so it's kind of based on like a comic from way back when, like the '70s, or so that's the whole thing about it. And superheroes, they're like you're kind of supposed to turn your brain off and just kind of like okay, like don't question things, because there's a lot of things that were questionable. So that's kind of the thing.
Yes.
But for me, it's still fun. So that's why I gave it a 4 stars. So that's
Like, and I feel like a lot of times they didn't even try to show him like walking with his cane. Like
right.
if they did, they didn't actually have it on the screen. I don't
Yeah.
know if it's because he wasn't really comfortable with it or what, but it was just like, I wonder if he's using his cane properly. And like no, he probably isn't.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Yeah.
Because if anything, it was
And
more
but
of a
one of
weapon. Hmm.
huh?
If anything, they used like he used it as a weapon because like the cane was like a disguise for like his nunchucks or like different weapons that he had, like a baton. So the cane itself
Yeah.
was like the weapon, like But yeah,
Oh, that's right. Even as a child, he used it
yeah,
as a weapon. So.
yeah.
That's crazy. But one of the things I noticed about the movie, which was kind of cool, because I was trying to because like I said, I don't really know how to read Braille that well, but I did
Hmm.
learn some of the letters, and so it was kind of cool that as the movie comes in with the
The
credits and
graphics. Oh
everything,
yeah,
you see like the dots form into letters, and I'm like, is it really? Are they using Braille?
right.
And when I could recognize some of the letters, I was like, yes, I think yeah they are.
Hmm.
So I thought that was pretty clever.
Yeah, that was good.
I'll say that. But like I said, other than that, I just don't think like they used. I don't know. Like I didn't like the depiction, basically.
Right. Yeah, yeah. No, I know what you mean. I know what you mean.
All right, then. So unless you have anything else to add, I guess we could move to the next movie, right?
Yeah, yeah. I was just gonna kind of say that it was after this movie, right, that Ben Affleck and Jennifer Garner got together, pretty much, or you think this was the
I
start of
don't.
it?
I really don't know how long after, but obviously they ended up
Yeah.
together, and then they weren't, or they
Right.
aren't anymore.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah, Ben has a things. He has
For
a thing for the
Jennifer's,
Jens.
yeah,
So
yeah. It was still Benefit, right? Just a different version. Okay.
yeah.
All right. Sorry for that sidetrack. Okay, but you were saying?
Okay, so the next movie that we watched was Scent of a Woman. That movie came out in 1992, so it was a while ago. But it had Al Pacino as Frank Slade and Chris O'Donnell. So, those were the two people in this movie. What do you think, and what do you have to say about this?
Well, this was a really good movie. I had never seen it before, but I know it's a classic. Like everyone always talks about. I mean, they always kind of do that impression of Al Pacino, like the hooah, right? But it's kind of like I never knew what movie it was from because he's in like a lot of movies. So I
Yeah,
finally
and this was actually one of my first. This was
this
the
actually
only Al Pacino movie I've ever seen.
same here. I know he's like famous for Scarface and other movies, but I haven't seen those movies either. But yeah, this
Hmm.
is the first one I see of him, and no, he did a really good job. I think he even won the Oscar for his role in this movie. So I really enjoyed this movie, and it's kind of like what I'm not gonna spoil too much of it, but I know people probably already saw it, but I'll just kind of say like it's pretty much like a he's like a depressed blind man who I guess he was a colonel, and now he's blind. I think he's been blind like for 5 years, and he's just kind of like he wants to pretty much kill himself, and he gets like somebody to kind of care for him for the weekend, and at the end of the weekend, his plan is to well, kill himself. So it's a very interesting story, and it's got emotional parts to it, and it's actually funny, believe it or not. Like so,
Yeah.
but it's a very enjoyable movie for sure. And this is like
What do you rate it?
uh,
What's your rating?
4.25 or 4.5, like yeah, 4.5, 4.5 stars.
That's not bad.
Hmm.
That's actually pretty good. And I actually went all the way. I rated
Oh
it a
wow.
5 because like it was unexpectedly funny. Like
Right.
I mean he was crude in this movie, but
Uh-huh.
I just couldn't help but to laugh. And when I give it a 5 stars, it just means that I wouldn't mind seeing it again. And in fact, it wouldn't be so bad to own this movie because
Right.
it's one that you could watch and enjoy. And it was, I thought, pretty good, like better than I expected it to be. So 5 for me. And
Awesome.
we both agreed on something. We agreed that the title just doesn't really say much about the movie. Like, we think that it should have had a different title. So you came up with some ideas of what you think it should have been instead of Scent of a Woman, right? What are
Yeah.
yours?
Yeah, like I think maybe the blind weekend, maybe, or blind weekend, kind of like because that would explain more because scent of a woman wasn't really like a big deal in the movie. I mean, he was kind of like woman crazy, but that wasn't like what the whole movie was about either. So I would think like the blind weekend because it was like over the weekend that he needed, well, that he wanted to go New York, and he had the Chris O'Donnell as his caretaker or helper. So the blind
Mm-hmm.
weekend would be one for me, and then another title was like maybe After Sight. So it's kind of like him living after he had sight. So After Sight, and then
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't know, Hua, just because he kept saying it over and over in the movie. No, I think those are the two titles that I would kind of think about. What about you? Would if it had an alternate title, what would you name it?
So I love coming up with titles because I
Right.
write poetry sometimes, like come up with stories or whatever. And I always think it'd be cool to have like books, but I always, the title is like everything.
Mm-hmm.
So I have A Second Chance is one of my
Okay,
titles.
that's a good one.
Bet Between Life is another one. Because like he doesn't really know where his life is going and
Mm-hmm.
what he really wants out of life.
Right.
The way I see it, because this kind of has like
Yeah.
two different stories happening, with Chris O'Donnell's character as
Yeah.
well as his, and then what we saw, because
Mm-hmm.
like once again, um, like it has to do with something that Chris O'Donnell's character sees,
Right.
and also like like how he sees his life, Al
Right.
Pacino character, how he sees his life. So
Yeah.
what we saw was another one that I thought of.
Right. Those are good. I think the one I liked is The Way I See It. That's kind of cool because it's got like the way I see it's got like two different kind of applications and meanings. So that's a good one, I think.
Okay, yeah, yeah. So yeah, we could have done better at naming this movie for sure. But they went with Sense of a Woman, which when you picked this movie out, I was like, ooh, that sounds pretty seductive. So
Yeah.
let's see what we have here. So we were
Right.
a little bit worried, but I guess we
Uh-huh.
didn't really have that much to worry about.
Yeah, because I thought it was gonna be like a sensual or like a romance movie. I was kind of waiting for like, okay, where's the romantic like aspect of it, but there really wasn't. So, but
Right.
but yeah,
So they kind of tricked us, and I
yeah,
think like we're saying, just it would have been better with a different title, because then I guess we wouldn't have been so misled, but it was okay that we were misled
right,
because It was still good.
Right.
So, okay, we have other movies and shows which feature blind characters. And when doing this show, we came across like various movies, and I know that there's a bunch now that I want to watch because of the blind characters in the movies. So I have a patch of blue. Okay, so that's one of them that has Sidney Poitier. At first sight, um, I think you mentioned that you want to see this movie as well.
Yeah, I want to see it. Like the plot of it seems very interesting. I think I read the plot and
Val
just
Kilmer.
yeah, Val Kilmer is the character, and there's another like there's a woman who's on vacation, and she comes like to this resort, and there's where she meets Val Kilmer, and he's like a blind man there, and he's
Hmm.
very like adapt. He's adapted to his blindness very well. Like he's very like positive and just very like I mean he's very resourceful, and she like falls like in love with him really like I guess. But she takes him to New York, and then he gets like there's an experimental procedure that can give him his eyesight back, and
Yep.
and then I guess it's him like with sight and just seeing the world in a different way. So, I mean
Yeah,
that's
it
pretty
sounds
much. Oh
interesting.
yeah, for sure. So I don't know if that's gonna be like if he's gonna be okay with that or not. So it's kind of one of those things that really do want to see like the change in his life, in that movie. So for sure,
And
I would want to see that.
basically most of these movies are older, but
Mm-hmm.
we just haven't gotten around to watching them or
Yeah.
didn't know they existed. So
Right. Right.
the other one is called Bright Victory, and I think it has Arthur Kennedy. Other another one I think is one that you actually have seen, and it's called Butterflies Are Free.
Right.
And Edward Albert, it says.
Yeah.
So
And
can you
Goldie
tell us
Hawn.
about that?
Yeah, this one's like he's like an aspiring like songwriter, and he moves like into the city into like an apartment for the first time. He's like a young man, and he has like a very dominant and overseeing mother. So it's kind of the first time he's like living away from home, and he's like living in an apartment now, like independently. And his neighbor is like an aspiring actress, and she's Goldie Hawn, and she's like a free spirit. So it's very interesting the way they interact, and he kind of falls like he gets a crush on her, and it's interesting
Of
just
course.
the dynamic that they have, because in a way he's kind of like experiencing the world through her, and he gets very encouraged and exciting, and then kind of then there's like the mom wants to like come get him and get him to leave, go back home. So it's interesting like the way the I mean, I'd never seen it. I had just kind of I was channel flipping one day, and that movie was on, and it just caught my attention, and I just I did like it. So I think you would like it if you were to see it.
I think it sounds really good, and I
Yeah.
like Goldie Hawn,
Right.
so yeah, I definitely want to add that to my list. Another movie I have is Don't Breathe,
Uh-huh.
and then If You Could See What I Hear, and that has I guess it's about like a singer or Mark Singer, something like
Mm-hmm.
that,
Right.
and Jennifer Eight, which has Uma Thurman. Then we have Magnificent Obsession, which was a movie that came out in 1954. Um, so then another one I have is Ordinary Heroes. That sounds
Yeah.
interesting. And here's another one that I think you said you would be interested in watching, and it's See No Evil, Hear No Evil.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, that's one we both want to see.
Yeah. Yeah. I know that's a classic comedy, and it's Gene Wilder and Richard Pryor, and one of them is
Mm-hmm.
deaf and one of them is blind, and they're kind of like they get I think blamed for a crime, and then they themselves kind of work together, and they kind of help each other. Like one can't see, one can't hear, but they kind of compensate, help each other out. So it's a
That sounds
comedy.
hilarious. That really
Yeah.
does sound so
Yeah,
funny.
and I've never seen it, but I've heard like it's a classic for sure, like a comedy classic, and I'm surprised I haven't seen it, but I really got to get to watching that because I know it's very funny. I mean, not very realistic in some of the like the things, because I
Right.
think there's a scene where they're kind of like they get in a bar fight, and then the deaf guy's kind of telling the one who can't hear telling the blind one, okay, to your right, to your left. So he's kind of just throwing punches, based on, I don't know. It seems funny. Like that scene is something that I kind of remember a little bit people talking about. So, I mean, that's funny. For sure I want to
Yeah,
see it.
it does sound really funny. And I remember going to a couple camps in the summer. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I get shipped off to
Right.
camps for visually impaired. But some of those camp camps for the deaf and
Oh,
blind, and
yeah,
I was
yeah.
like, okay, how's this gonna work out, you know? So
Right.
kind of the same thing. And I remember meeting an interpreter at the camp for the blind because there were students who had both
Right.
visual impairments and hearing impairments.
Right.
So that would be hard. It'd be like Helen Keller,
Yeah,
but
exactly.
sometimes it happens that you have both groups together because
Right.
of that.
Right.
So
And then
this movie would
yeah.
be interesting.
Oh yeah.
But yeah,
I was gonna say another thing about that because like sometimes like blindness isn't the only thing. A lot of times, sometimes it's kind of like blindness and autism or some kind of other like it's not always just blindness that like afflicts us. You know what I mean? Sometimes it's kind
right,
of like there's compounds and stuff. So I know that I've kind of from some of the support groups that I've been on Facebook and stuff. I kind of notice that sometimes it's other things like cerebral palsy and blindness or different things, and even some people like deafness and blindness, like partial deafness or whatever. So I mean it's always
right.
like it's not always just one thing.
Right. But speaking of movies that feature blind people, the next one is Susie Hendricks is the character. This is Audrey Hepburn, one of my favorite
Mm-hmm.
actresses, and she's in a movie called Wait Until Dark.
Mm.
And then there's one more movie that you have seen, and it has Denzel Washington. Can you tell us about it?
Right. This one's called The Book of Eli, and Denzel Washington is Eli, and pretty much it's already like post-apocalyptic times, and
Mm-hmm.
I think I might have to say this just a little bit about him, right? But he's kind of like he has a book that he has to like deliver to a certain location for to restore kind of like civilization because it's kind of become like martial law, so there's like no order or anything, but he needs to deliver this book, and then if he manages to deliver this book like this will bring order or bring kind of structure back into the world. But there's another person, like the villain of the movie, who he knows what the book he's carrying is, and he wants to like take it from him so he can control it. And pretty much it's crazy, but there are two reveals about it, and I don't want to spoil it, but there is a blind aspect to it, so I don't want to spoil it for you, like you were saying. So unless you want to know.
No, that's all right. I
Okay.
mean, I probably won't see it, but there might
Right.
be other people who are interested in
Yeah.
this movie.
Okay. I'll tell
So,
you after
okay,
anything. Right.
yeah, so moving on, we're moving on to movies where characters are blind for a short time. And so we have a few movies. Star Wars. Have you seen the Star Wars
Oh yeah.
movies? Do you know who I'm
Yes.
talking about?
Yes, I've seen all of them. Yeah, this one was Han Solo, and this is after he's frozen in the I think it's carbonite or something. And so he's frozen for a year in this like substance, and that's kind of like how the movie had ended, the previous movie. And then at the beginning of the next movie, they kind of like they set him free, so they release him from it. But the effect of it is that he's kind of like he's partially blind for like a temporarily blind. I mean, so he's blind for a period of time, but it does wear off. So he does fit that characteristic of, being blind for a while.
Yeah, it's for a short time that they're
Mm-hmm.
blind.
Mm-hmm.
Another one is the Matrix trilogy. I know that I've seen some of them, and
Right.
you have you?
Yes, I've seen them all three, and then there's a new one coming out, which I'm kind of excited about. But yeah, in this one, Keanu Reeves, who's the main character, and he's Neo.
Mm-hmm.
And in the last movie, in Matrix Revolutions, it's like the Agent Smith, who is the villain of the movie. He pretty much like
Mm-hmm.
blinds him, so Neo is blind. And this is
Mm-hmm.
at the end of the movie, but in a way, like when he blinds him, he kind of gives him more power because when he's blinded, that's when he can see like all these the machine like
Yeah.
programs and stuff. So that's kind of what allows him to actually defeat the machine. So like blindness actually becomes like a strength in that part. So he is blinded for a while at the end of that movie.
Okay. All right. So now we're moving on to TV shows that I've actually seen that had people with a visual impairment. Some of them like were just like for a show or something like that. But I'm just mentioning them because they were shows that I used to watch, and
Hmm.
I just think it's interesting.
Right.
Um, Even though maybe I didn't catch that particular episode. So I remember the show Elf, and
Right.
I guess that featured a person that had a visual impairment, probably was totally blind because she, the character, did not even know that Elf was an alien.
Yeah.
She
Right.
just was a weird person, and that's it, right?
Yeah.
So
Uh,
that's interesting.
yeah.
And
That reminds
Yeah,
me. Are you done with that one, or you were gonna skip to your next show?
I'm going to the next show
Oh,
unless you have something else you need
yeah,
to
because
say.
that reminded me of a cartoon that I would watch. Also, it was called Gargoyles. I don't know if you ever saw it. It was like a cartoon, and pretty much they were like gargoyles that. I mean, during the day they were stone, and then at night they would like be alive, and it was the same kind of thing. Like the gargoyles. Like one of the older gargoyles, he kind of like I mean he actually made a friend who was blind, so the same kind of thing, like the blind friend didn't know he was a gargoyle, like, but they kept like a good friendship. So it's kind of one of the, like Alf, like that reminded me of the Alf episode.
Oh,
Well,
very interesting.
yeah, so it's
So
kind of
like that wasn't the Smurfs because the gargoyles I thought they had to do with the Smurfs.
no, this was like more of an action. It came out it used to come out like in the 90s. I would watch it. I
Okay.
watched the whole thing, and it was interesting actually. And then there's I'll tell you about it later too. If we don't touch up on it, I'll tell you about another movie that had a blind character in it. Um,
Okay, well, when I finish,
okay,
then you can tell me,
right.
because like I think you will be the one that will do yours next.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so and unless you've seen some of these, then you can say, yeah, I've
Right.
seen that. So like one of the ones that I really liked was also like a animated one, and it's the character is Toph Bei Fang, which
Mm-hmm.
is and on the show Avatar, The Last Airbender, and
Right.
she's the Earthbender, and I just loved her
Yeah.
character because she was just so funny and like I mean she made fun of
Mm-hmm.
herself
Right.
and everyone else kind of just laughed at her and they didn't take like she
Yeah.
didn't take herself too seriously, so
Right.
she was a
Right.
good character.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. And I don't know, did you ever see that show? I think it's a
Uh,
great one.
oh yeah, no, I've seen it, and also something funny about it is that there was like a running joke that they would forget that she was blind, so they would like sometimes they would kind of like joke about forgetting she was blind, so it was kind of like a running gag at times. So, but no, that's awesome that they depicted her like in a very positive way.
Yep. And here's one that I really didn't love that I did see, and I was just like, oh my goodness. It was called Blind Justice, and it was a
Okay.
TV show that came out in 2005. It was about a blind cop,
Uh huh.
but it only lasted for one season, and it had 13 episodes, which I was kind of like, yeah, that makes sense
Yeah,
because,
they canceled
like
it.
you said, it's hard to imagine like a blind person with a gun, and
Right.
it just didn't seem very realistic, and
Right.
actually kind of scared me. I was like, I wouldn't want a blind cop with
Right.
a gun doing that kind of job. But yeah, so that
Right.
was Blind Justice, and I remember it being on TV.
Mm-hmm.
Also, Michael Landon was on a show called Bonanza, and Little Joe was blind for an episode. So I remember watching that show a couple times.
Right.
Another show that I used to love watching had Melissa Sue Anderson on Little House on the Prairie, and obviously she played Mary Ingalls.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Ingalls was became blind later on in the show, and she also there were also her husband was blind, and
Wow.
there were also the children at the school who were blind. And then they have this show called Quantum Leap. I
Yeah.
don't know if you've ever seen that show,
Yes, I would
but
watch some. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Sam Beckett, I guess for one of the episodes becomes blind.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
that's kind of interesting.
No, that is interesting.
Mhm. So, can you do you have any other ones that you wanted to add
Um,
that
yeah, I would say. I mean, I've seen.
Mhm.
I think in The Simpsons there was an episode when Marge went blind. Um, I think there
Oh yeah,
was.
we're going to the TV shows right now where characters are blind for a short time.
Right.
So yeah, that would be one of them. I
Yeah.
can name them.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Do
think. Yeah.
you
Like.
remember that episode?
Uh, I remember a part of it. Not a whole lot, but it's always like it's just for an episode, and then she kind of gains her vision back at the end, and then also there was another time also that there were actually was like a blind student that was in the like and then the elementary student that Bart and them dealt with, so it's kind of like that aspect, but then it was just one episode too. So but yeah, there's been that, and then as far as I wanted to mention earlier about the movies, but I think we already passed it.
We
um
we can you can go back to the movies. Which
okay,
one?
like in Fantastic Four, I don't know if you, I mean, it's another superhero movie, so I'm sure you haven't like don't know too much. But there's in Fantastic Four, the Thing. He's a man, right? And pretty much well, four people went like to space, and they had like this kind of an accident, and they had like radiation, and the radiation gave them like superpowers. and one of them could stretch. So that was Mr. Fantastic, and then the other one was Invisible Woman, so she could kind of turn invisible and have a little bit of force fields and stuff like that. And then the Human Torch, he could kind of turn on and off. He would become like flame. But the fourth one, he just became like a thing. They call him the Thing, but he was kind of his body became rock, so he just became like a rock, a type humanoid, and he couldn't. So yeah, this person becomes like a rock humanoid type of creature, of person. I mean, and he can't really turn it off. Like he looks like that all the time. So pretty much, his girlfriend dumps him. Like the girlfriend that he had before dumps him because she's like just. I mean, I don't know. She can't handle it, and he does. There's a blind woman that actually falls in love with him, and that's who he has. That becomes the couple. So that's another like his girlfriend who's named Alicia, I think. So she is a blind character who's in I think both part one and part two of the Fantastic Four movies. So that her, I guess all that to say that she's the blind person in the movie in those movies.
Wow, that's a lot. Yeah, but sounds interesting. I have heard of those movies. I have never watched them, but
Right.
I guess I'm more TV
Yeah.
shows is what I know about.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I guess we'll continue on with TV shows.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and this is TV shows where characters are blind for a short time. So we have Allison, which is by Courtney Thorne Smith. And this is from Melrose Place. Allison became blind,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, probably just for a short time, because it's not realistic, a
Right.
lot of these things.
Yeah.
So, do you know the next one is Henry Winkler? Do you know where that's from and
Uh,
who that is?
that was Fonzie from Happy Days. Yeah, he was Fonzie in Happy Days, and there was an episode like which I think is like very ridiculous. I think he gets hit on the head with like a lunch tray or something, and then he's like blind for like the majority of the episode. So it's kind of ridiculous.
That is pretty ridiculous. But I guess if anyone who doesn't have a visual impairment wants to try being blind, all you really have to do is like
Just wear blindfold.
blindfold yourself
Exactly.
or just don't turn your lights on during nighttime and test it out and see
Right.
how well you do, right?
Right. Yeah. Right.
Okay. So Dynasty had a character. Blake Carrington becomes blind in that show. Then we have Star Trek Star Trek The Next Generation. Do you know who was blind in that show?
Um, not exactly. I just yeah, I really don't know.
So I guess that is Gordy LaForge. I have not really watched that show, so I really don't know that much about it.
Right.
But then we have the next show, which is Babylon 5.
Right.
Do you know anyone that was in that show that became blind or anything like that?
I'm not too familiar with those, like the Babylons and the Star Treks, like the TV shows themselves. Can you tell me?
Yeah. It's G. Carr, it says, which is Andreas Castulas. I don't know
Oh,
that show
okay.
as well either. And there's a show called MASH. There was a character that was blind in that one. It says Hawkeye Pierce. And then we move on to Hope Adams, which I guess Hope became blind in a show of The Young and the Restless, which
Mm,
of course is a soap
soap opera.
opera. And then we have Becker on the Becker show. We
Mm-hmm.
have a character named Jake Malniak, and I
Mm-hmm.
know that show a lot of people watched. Also, the
Yeah.
show MacGyver
Right.
includes Peter, which is Dana Alcar, I guess, and then we have Star Trek has Spock, who becomes blind in an episode, and then we have Hawaii Five O, which has Steve McGarrett, who becomes blind in that show as well.
Hmm.
And then we actually have some cartoons which had like at least one episode with a blind character. We have Family Guy, where Peter Griffin becomes blind. We have The Simpsons, which you mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
as well as Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Do you remember which turtles become blind in
I
the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle
I
ones?
think they all did at one point or another because there's so many like different versions of them. So because I remember like not the same series but a different one, like when one of them was like Leonardo, then the next one Donatello, Michelangelo. So pretty much like they each had an episode where they kind of like had some kind of blind episode. So it's kind of
So the only one I don't see listed on here is actually Donatello, because I think all of them become
Oh, okay.
blind in either the comic books or one of the cartoon
Right.
series. So
Yeah. Oh, okay.
Donatello is the only one that seems to escape
Oh, well,
that
that's good. Yeah,
fate.
that's good to know. I thought all of them, but that's cool. That's good to know. So that could be like a trivia question. Which one didn't?
Yeah, and it's interesting because like yeah, all these shows for dramatic effect,
Yeah.
you know, they blind and they do this in a lot of novellas too.
Yes.
Somebody always goes blind or is paralyzed or has some
Yeah.
kind of disability. But for us, we have to live this with
Right.
you know, most of us are not going to get our sight back
Right.
or we have to live with this condition for our whole lives. So I mean, seeing people on TV and movies being blind is interesting just because we can relate to them
Right.
if they make it relatable, you know, but we know that it's not real likely that you're gonna get your vision back as they do in most of these books and these shows and movies, you know. So
Right.
yeah, so we are on our last question, which is, what are some things that most people don't expect a blind person to be able to do that they can?
Well, this kind of ties in with one of our episodes that we had about like the famous blind people in history, and that's kind of like remember there was he was an honorable mention, but he was a man like the first blind person ever to climb the Mount Everest. So you wouldn't expect a blind person to, I mean, do that. Like some able-bodied people don't even do that. So how much more a blind person? So that's one. And then we also talked about the first legally blind runner in the Olympics. So that was another accomplishment, and also people like a doctor. You wouldn't think a blind person could become a doctor, but they did. He did. There were a couple actually. So it's just impressive what blind people have been able to do and kind of break that stigma. And then that just because you're blind you can't do something. But these people have proven that despite that limitation, we can still do things that you wouldn't expect.
Right. And even though a lot of these shows and some of these movies seem like a little bit unrealistic or sometimes a lot,
Right.
in a way, even though we might not always like what we see on the media and how we are portrayed as blind or visually impaired people, I think sometimes it's kind of nice to be able to see at least some representation
Right.
because like we don't always see it, you know, so it's
Hmm.
just always interesting and it just I think in a way makes other people think about us even though like I said it's not always accurate. But
Yeah.
as individuals, we can show people what it's really like. The best ways to do it, of course, is just to be around a lot of people and just show them how it really is. So I hope
Exactly.
you were inspired to be able to maybe look for some of those other shows that we mentioned. And I mean, I know that I want to see some of them. And, you know, watching these movies that we watched was really interesting. And I hope to be able to watch other ones as well. So until next time.
Well said. I agree. Yeah. Until next time. Talk to you soon.